All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of Indian power generation. Specifically, we're looking at Adani Power Ltd's second quarter results for fiscal year 2025. And we've got a pretty good stack of sources here. We've got the press release straight from Adani. We've also got their letter to the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange of India. And we even dug up the independent auditor's review report. Now, we're not just going to get bogged down in numbers here.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah, we want to really get a sense of Adani Power's overall strategy, the kind of big moves they're making, and understand what all of this means for their place in the Indian energy landscape, which, let me tell you, is changing pretty rapidly these days.
Yeah, it really is. I think these sources do a great job of painting a picture of that.
Yeah.
And, going beyond just the spreadsheets and jargon, it's really about understanding those forces at play, shaping India's energy future.
Exactly. So let's maybe start with some of those headline numbers, from Adani's press release. They're painting, I'd say, a pretty rosy picture with some serious year-over-year growth here. We're talking a 20% jump in consolidated revenue for the first half of the fiscal year. That's 28,517 crore rupees, which is a pretty big number. And even their EBITDA, and for those who don't know, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's basically a way of looking at their operating profitability. That's also up a healthy 38.3%. Hold on to your hats because profit before tax is skyrocketing. It's up by 69%. Even on a quarterly basis, the growth is still pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is that this growth, it's coming at a time when India's power demand was actually pretty flat in Q2, and that was mostly due to, you guessed it, the weather. So Adani's success, it's not just about riding the wave of a booming market. It's coming from these strategic decisions they're making, and specifically their really aggressive expansion of capacity.
They're making things happen, not just waiting for things to happen to them. And speaking of making things happen, Adani Power has been... Well, they've been on this capacity expansion spree. It's like they're gobbling up power plants like they're going out of style. Just this quarter alone, they acquired 3 new plants, adding a pretty hefty 2,300 milliW of capacity to their portfolio.
Oh.
And they didn't waste any time integrating these plants into operations. So it's clear that this aggressive acquisition strategy, it's a real cornerstone of their growth plan.
For sure. And it's worth noting that acquiring power plants, especially what they call stressed assets, it's not as easy as it might sound. To turn those assets around and successfully integrate them, into existing operations, that takes a lot of expertise. And Adani seems to have that, in spades. So that in itself is a competitive advantage. And, I think that's reflected in these really strong results we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there's one deal that I have to admit really piqued my curiosity. It's the Dahanu acquisition. So Adani Power purchased the Adani Dahanu thermal power station. But here's the thing. They bought it from a related party, North Maharashtra Power Limited, for 815 crore rupees. And I don't know about you, but whenever I hear related party transaction, my ears perk up just a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely something that warrants a closer look. And the letter to the stock exchanges actually addresses this. So they state that while the companies are related, this particular transaction was exempt from certain regulatory requirements. However, I think it does raise questions about transparency. Was this deal done at a fair market value, especially in light of that short seller report we're going to discuss later on?
That's a really great point. It's all about context, right? What seems like a very straightforward acquisition suddenly becomes more intriguing when you consider the bigger picture, It makes you wonder if there's more to the story.
Oh, for sure. And that's what I think makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're peeling back those layers, uncovering these nuances that you might miss otherwise. It's like financial detective work.
I love that analogy. So we have this picture of Adani Power. They're on a roll, snapping up power plants, racking up these impressive financial gains. But, as with any good story, there's got to be another side to it. And in this case, that other side involves some legal and regulatory hurdles that Adani's trying to navigate. We see mentions of these ongoing issues related to coal supply, tariff disputes, environmental compensation. It pops up in the press release, the auditor's report. It's clearly something on their radar.
Yeah, and these aren't just minor inconveniences either. They have the potential to really throw a wrench in Adani's plans. So maybe let's start with coal supply. India relies heavily on coal for power generation. Any disruption to that supply chain, it can have a ripple effect, throughout the entire sector.
Yeah, it's like a game of Jenga, right? You pull out the wrong piece and the whole tower can come tumbling down. And it sounds like Adani Power is facing challenges on multiple fronts when it comes to coal.
Yeah, exactly. So there was the cancellation of their Jitpur coal block, which they were really counting on to fuel their power plants. And that's created a major headache for them. Now they're scrambling to, you know, secure coal from other sources, and often that comes at a higher cost. And of course, that can eat into their profits.
So what are they doing about that? Are they just sort of like sitting back and accepting these higher costs?
No, no, they're not. They're fighting back. They're trying to claim tariff compensation from the power distribution companies, the discoms, as they're often called. Adani's argument is that these increased coal costs, they're due to factors beyond their control, and therefore the discoms should be the ones footing the bill.
Which, I mean, makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But I imagine the discoms aren't exactly thrilled about this.
No, you guessed it. It's led to a whole bunch of tariff disputes, basically legal battles over who's responsible for these additional costs. And as you can imagine, these disputes, they create a lot of uncertainty for Adani Power. Will they be able to recover these costs? Will it impact their future revenues? These are questions that investors are definitely thinking about.
Yeah, it's like we're watching this high-stakes poker game play out, and we're just waiting to see, how the cards unfold. But before we dive too deep into all of the legal and regulatory stuff, I think we got to address the elephant in the room. That short seller report from last year.
Oh, right. How could we forget? That sent shockwaves through the market, didn't it?
It did. And it really cast a long shadow over the entire Adani group.
And it's definitely relevant to our deep dive today, so. The auditor's report actually acknowledges these allegations, and they note that Adani maintains they acted in compliance with all the regulations. However, investigations are still ongoing. And the report also mentions a new show cause notice. That was issued by SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, just this quarter.
So while Adani Power is projecting this image of, growth and strength, there's this underlying tension, this cloud of uncertainty hanging over them. It's almost like a classic tale of, ambition versus adversity.
Exactly. And I think it's so important for the listener to understand both sides of the story. The impressive financial performance, that's just one piece of the puzzle. To get the full picture, we have to consider those legal and regulatory challenges, the potential impact of the short seller report, and how all of this might affect Adani Power's future. It's complicated, but that's what makes it so interesting to unpack.
Absolutely. I think we've laid a pretty good foundation for this deep dive so far. We have a good grasp of Adani's aggressive growth strategy, their impressive financials, and some of those potential roadblocks they might encounter down the line. But there's definitely more to uncover here, more layers to peel back. So stay with us as we continue our deep dive into Adani Power's Q2 results and really try to unravel the complexities of their journey.
Okay, so it seems like Adani Power, they're not afraid to take some risks. I mean, they're making some pretty bold moves.
Yeah, they are. It's almost like watching a high wire act.
Exactly.
Impressive, but also a little bit nerve-wracking.
A little bit, yeah.
You're just kind of waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's a good way to describe the situation they're in. On the one hand, they're really betting big on India's growing energy needs, expanding their capacity, securing those long-term agreements, like that 25-year deal with Maharashtra.
For that new 1,600 milliW project. But at the same time, they're also dealing with these regulatory hurdles, legal disputes, that lingering shadow of the short seller report.
The tough balancing act. And speaking of balancing acts, let's talk about their reliance on coal. I mean, they're doubling down on coal-fired power plants, even as the world seems to be moving, towards cleaner energy sources. So is this a risky gamble for them?
Well, it's certainly a gamble. There's no doubt about that. And the stakes are pretty high. But their argument, and they lay this out in their press release, is that coal is still essential for India to meet those baseload power requirements. They talk about the increasing peak demand and the need for reliable power generation, which renewables, at least for now, they can't fully provide.
So basically they're saying coal is still the workhorse of India's energy grid.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they're not alone in that belief either. I mean, India's energy needs are huge and they're complex. And while, yes, renewables are growing rapidly, coal is still expected to be a big part of the mix for the foreseeable future.
I mean, it makes sense when you consider the size of their population and how quickly their economy is growing. Yeah. But we can't just forget about those regulatory and legal issues, right? I mean, those could really throw a wrench into their plans.
Oh, absolutely. For example, there's that environmental compensation that they were ordered to pay by the National Green Tribunal for their Udupi power plant. It's a significant amount of money. And it really highlights the fact that they can't just focus on expansion. They also have to address the environmental impact of their operations.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that sustainability isn't just a buzzword. It's something that can really make or break a company these days. And then there's that whole coal supply issue. It sounds like they're fighting battles on multiple fronts there.
Right, so the cancellation of that JIT core coal block, it's forced them to look for other sources. And that often means importing coal, which is much more expensive. And as we talked about earlier, that's what's leading to those tariff disputes. With the discoms, it just adds another layer of complexity and uncertainty to their financial situation.
It's like a domino effect, isn't it? One problem leads to another.
Exactly.
And pretty soon, you're dealing with this whole cascade of challenges. It makes you wonder how they're managing it all.
Well, the auditor's report gives us some insight into that. So, for instance, they're trying to get a refund for the costs they incurred developing the Jitpur block. But of course, that's tied up in legal proceedings. And then at the same time, they're trying to, you know, mitigate the impact of those higher coal prices by pushing for those tariff adjustments. But of course, that's leading to more disputes with the discoms.
So it's like this constant push and pull. They're trying to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
but they're also being pulled back by all these challenges.
Right.
It must be exhausting.
I can imagine. But I think it also speaks to their determination, you know,
Yeah.
their resilience. They're not giving up easily.
No.
They're really fighting for every inch of ground, whether it's in the courtrooms, at the negotiating table, or even in the corridors of power.
This is what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's like we're watching this real-life business drama unfold. It's got everything: ambition, risk, conflict, and a whole lot of uncertainty.
It really
It's
does.
like a page-turner for finance enthusiasts.
Exactly. And I think it's important to maybe step back for a second and ask, why should the listener care about all of this? Why is the story important beyond just the world of, finance and energy?
That's a good question. Why should anyone outside of the industry pay attention to Adani Power?
Well, first of all, they're a major player in the Indian energy market. Their decisions have a real impact on power supply, prices, even the environment. And their reliance on coal, that has implications for India's carbon footprint and their commitment to a sustainable energy future.
So their story is kind of a microcosm of India's larger energy story.
Exactly. And then we have to remember, the elephant in the room, the Adani Group and those allegations of financial irregularities. Adani Power is part of that larger conglomerate. So any negative press or regulatory scrutiny, that can impact the entire group, potentially affecting investor confidence, even market stability.
It's a good reminder that even things that seem like isolated events
Yeah.
in the business world can have far-reaching consequences. So we have this company, Adani Power. They're striving for growth, grappling with challenges. And they're operating within this larger context of India's energy transition and the Adani Group's reputation. It's a lot to take in.
It certainly is. But I think we're making good progress here. We've explored their aggressive growth strategy, their impressive financial performance, and those significant headwinds they're facing, from coal supply issues to tariff disputes, environmental concerns, and we touched on that lingering shadow of the short seller report and its potential impact.
Yeah, we're really getting a sense of how complex their journey is. And we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover, more details to explore. So stick with us as we continue this deep dive into Adani Power's Q2 results. And we'll really try to understand the implications of their strategy and the challenges they face. As we're going through these reports, I keep coming across these little nuggets, these kind of intriguing details. And there's one I wanted to bring up. It involves a deal with Bangladesh, specifically with Adani Power's subsidiary, Adani Power Sharkhand Limited.
Right, yeah. They have that long-term power purchase agreement, right, with the Bangladesh Power Development Board to supply electricity from their 1,600 millidio thermal power stations. A pretty big deal for Adani. It really shows their ambitions,
Yeah.
going beyond just India.
Yeah.
But the auditor's report, it kind of hints at some potential payment issues there.
Does it?
Yeah, it does. What's the story there? Well, so the report says Adani Power, Charkhand Limited, they've been supplying the power, they've been issuing invoices, all according to the agreement. But there are some outstanding payments from the Bangladesh Power Development Board as of the reporting date.
So a little bit of a cash flow snag.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, is this just a temporary thing or a sign of something bigger? I mean, dealing with international power agreements like this, it's got to add a whole layer of complexity.
Oh, absolutely. International deals always come with their own unique set of challenges. You've got currency fluctuations, political risks, regulatory differences, this whole situation with Bangladesh. It's a good reminder that even with this ambitious growth strategy, Adani Power isn't immune to vulnerabilities.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of vulnerabilities, we have to circle back to that short seller report. I mean, it's like this shadow looming over everything we've talked about.
It really is.
And the auditor's report, it gives us some more details
Mm.
about the allegations, Adani's response.
Hmm.
It doesn't seem like things are settled yet.
No, not at all. The report actually goes into quite a bit of detail about the investigations launched by SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. They're looking into some pretty serious allegations, potential violations of those related party transaction regulations, concerns about how certain shareholdings are categorized, and whether they're in compliance with those public shareholding norms.
Wow.
It's a lot. And Adani Power, they strongly deny all of it, of course, saying they've always acted in accordance with the rules.
Like a legal thriller playing out in real time.
It really is.
On one side, you have Adani Power pushing forward with this aggressive growth strategy, projecting confidence. And then on the other side, you have these investigations, these allegations, creating so much uncertainty for investors.
It's a good reminder that financial performance is just one piece of the puzzle when you're evaluating a company. Governance, transparency, ethical conduct, those things matter too, especially in light of, all the corporate scandals we've seen.
Absolutely. So where does all of this leave us? We've gone through these Q2 results for Adani Power, and it's a story of remarkable growth, no doubt,
Yeah.
strategic acquisitions, these bold bets on coal, but also this tangled web of legal and regulatory challenges. What's the big takeaway here? What should our listener really understand about Adani Power?
I think the main takeaway is that they are a company at a crossroads. They're pursuing this high-risk, high-reward strategy. They're betting on India's continued reliance on coal-fired power, but they're doing it in a really complex and ever-changing energy landscape. They've got these headwinds, the regulatory scrutiny, the legal battles, the impact of that short seller report, and yet they're still trying to maintain that investor confidence, project this image of stability and growth.
It's a fascinating story, and it's not over yet. The decisions they make in the coming months and years, they're going to have a huge impact, not just on Adani Power itself, but on India's energy future, and even, I think, the global transition to a more sustainable energy mix. So our listener, after this deep dive, you're equipped with the knowledge to follow this story, to really critically evaluate Adani Power's actions and form your own conclusions about their prospects.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Remember, understanding business, it's not just about the numbers, it's about understanding the bigger picture. What forces are at play, the potential risks and rewards. And Adani Power, they're a perfect example of just how complex all of this can be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Adani Power's Q2 results. Hope you found it informative, insightful, and maybe even a little bit exciting. The world of business, it never stands still, right? Staying informed, that's the best way to navigate it all. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.